hey CLF, thanks for joining us yet again as we answer your questions that you had from the previous Sunday sermon. And we are once again here with Pastor Dave as he sits down with us. And hopefully you guys are being encouraged by this. Hopefully you guys are being equipped and even just clearing up some things that you had from the questions that you're bringing in. So let's just dive right into it. Last Sunday, you had the big idea of Jesus has provided ways that we can maintain redemptive relationships by his power, by the work within us, right? Mm-hmm. Can you just give us a quick rundown of what you're trying to do with that this past Sunday for us?
Yeah, so I think that one of the challenges that we have with interpersonal relationships, or really with anything in the Bible, is we number one, we fail to recognize that God has a plan. Mm-hmm. And then if we do find out he does have a plan, then we think to ourselves, well, there's no way we could ever do that. And so we minimize then the power that's at work within us. Mm-hmm. So the passion of the big idea was to say, listen, God has given us a plan where we don't have to fight. Mm-hmm. And it isn't just being nice to one another.
Sure.
We can actually sin against each other and reconcile that. We can actually have disagreements and walk away from the table caring for each other.
Sure.
Because Christ is at work within us. Yeah. And so that was really the passion of what I was hoping to get across. I just wanted people to really posture ourselves appropriately, that if God's given us a plan, he's given us power to go do it.
Sure. Yeah, and I think we all stumble into that every once in a while, is that, here we know that the righteousness of Christ dwells within us through the Holy Spirit, but how often do we actually call on that? And I would say that, even it becomes almost repetitive, if you will, that we think we're sinners, we're not capable of anything, but we absolutely are, because of what's already been accomplished.
Sure, I think you can get presumptuous, but I don't think that's what this is. This is about saying, okay, God has given us a plan. It's no different than preaching or sharing the gospel with a friend. Mm-hmm. The plan is you tell your friend the gospel. Mm-hmm. The hope is that they respond to the gospel.
Sure.
But when they don't respond to the gospel, we then think that we failed to do our job. Sure. When in reality, we gave the gospel as God said. Right. And we have to leave that. We have to learn to obey God and leave the results in the hands of God.
Sure.
Because only God is the one that can transform the heart on any of these things.
Sure.
So that really is the heart behind it. Is, hey, let's stop analyzing the situation like, okay, so I've been offended. Do I need to go talk to that person? Well, yes, you should. Mm-hmm. Let's stop analyzing and making all the ways out of it.
Sure.
And instead go sit down and have the conversation, believing that God's at work within us. Mm-hmm. And then trusting the results to him. And if that person blows their stack, well, then we got a whole other issue we get to deal with. And I think that's the way to look at it.
Yeah. So let's jump into one of our first questions, which comes from Matthew 7, 1-2. And that verse says, "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, will it be measured to you." So the question is, what is the difference between not judging others and holding them accountable?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what Jesus is wrestling with and warning about is self-righteous criticisms. The Pharisees were really good about telling people what to do, but not doing any of it themselves. Yeah. And then calling people on the carpet when they themselves were living in the same sin. Mm-hmm. And so Jesus is basically saying, listen, stop self-righteously criticizing and judging others. Mm-hmm. Instead, first recognize you got your own issues. Mm-hmm. And then notice what he says in the text. He doesn't say, don't take the speck out of your brother's eye. He says, don't take it out until you've taken the log out of your own eye. Mm-hmm. So when you take the log out of your own eye, then you can see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. And really the posture that we should have is Galatians 6, where Galatians 6 tells us, if we ever see a brother or sister in sin, or they've stumbled in some way, we who are the Spirit of God residing within us are to go correct them, or to help them, restore them, but first looking to ourselves so that we don't fall prey to the same sin.
Right.
So I tell people often, we're not to self-righteously judge people at all. Mm-hmm. But Scripture never tells us to not judge one another, or not judge the fruit of somebody's life. We're not to do that self-righteously. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what Jesus is getting after. We've got to be careful. Now, granted, that's why I was saying on Sunday, and one of the points is when you're going to talk to somebody or confront them or confess sin, you're doing it for their benefit, not just your own. we so often say, I just want to get this off my back, or I got to get something off my mind, or I got to finally unload on you because I'm so tired of how you treated me. Instead of saying, no, this is actually for their benefit. So if I'm going to bring to a brother a sin, the goal is he sees it, it helps him change, and he becomes a different man to serve his wife, his family, and the people around him. Sure. Not that I can pat myself on the back and say, see there, this is because of that conversation we had. And this guy, look at that, and or this guy hurt me so bad, now I'm going to tell him how he really treated me, and I think he's a chump.
So you have that person who, just wants to go out there and confront the confront the other person.
Yep.
That they clearly have no quarrels with having anything blinding their sight, if you will. But then you have the other person, right? That looks at themselves so intrinsically, if you will, and just brutally being honest with themselves that they're looking at themselves. They're just like, man, who am I to go and confront this guy on anything? Can you touch on, for that person, what are the things that we need to be aware of because it is a benefit to them? Yeah.
So I think, well, first I'd say, if we only leave the accountability and the confrontation to somebody who is sinless, there's only one individual in the universe that can
We're toast.
We're done, right? And further, if you then recognize that Jesus, being called Christians, being followers of Christ, we're actually in Christ to do the work of Christ here on the earth. And one of those works is to be our brother's keeper, right? My favorite story is Luke 15 in the prodigal son story. Well, that's a funny story because this younger brother runs off, right? He gets to go spend his inheritance. Where's the older brother?
Right there.
The older brother stays home, works in the field. He does everything that looks really righteous. Guess where the older brother should have been? He should have been going after the younger brother.
Bringing him home.
But instead, when the younger brother returns home, because the true older brother went after him, Jesus, and true older brother brought him home, and the father received him, what did the older brother say then? He said, wait, I've been here all this time working. Now you're going to throw a party for your son who went on? Right? So he was in worse standing than the younger brother who had returned home. And so my point is, he did not understand his role as his brother's keeper. And so when we understand that's our role, it allows us to say that's how we represent Christ. So, yes, I've got sin. But the issue that Jesus is dealing with in Matthew 7, as well as even in Galatians 6 that Paul deals with, is I'm not intentionally sinning in ways that I'm confronting you with, calling you on the carpet without first looking at my own stuff first, right? There's been plenty of, look, man, I'm enough to confess how arrogant and proud I can be. And I'm probably the first guy in the room that could recognize an arrogant and proud man because it takes one to know one.
I've seen that before.
I've seen this somewhere, right? So if I were to say to that guy, hey, listen, man, I struggle with pride, so I could never confront you with your pride, right? Or I should say, hey, listen, I'm really one beggar showing another beggar where the bread's at, and God's revealed to me that these are things of pride in my life.
Sure.
I think there'd be something for you to evaluate in your own life too, because what do you think on that?
Yeah.
And then suddenly we're down a road where we're two fellow strugglers linking arms to conquer pride together. That to me sounds like a way better plan than just looking inward all the time and going, oh, I can't do this, woe is me, I'm so bad. Rather than saying, no, I am sinful, and I do have some sinful tendencies in my heart, yet God has equipped me and given me a plan and empowered me. When I'm sinned against or I see a brother in sin, I'm to go to them graciously and gently and carefully.
Yeah, you bring up a good point on just instead of thinking that you have nothing to contribute to the table, if you are kind of falling into the same sin, that you recognize as this other brother of yours, instead of looking at them and going, hey man, I recognize that. It's something that I battle with myself. Here's kind of what works for me. May not necessarily work for you, but I just want to throw that out there for your benefit because I love you, and that kind of thing.
And I think even probably exploring it with them a little bit more. I mean, like for me, I like to ask people to explore with me, like, do you see this in yourself? If you do, where do you see it coming up in you? Do you see it in me? So we're in this thing together. It's not just one dude.
Yeah, no, that's really good. On Sunday, you had your point number 2 was all about we are, this premise on saying we are to meet in the middle.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be going. This person's supposed to be coming. Can you touch a little bit on what you were trying to get at there?
Yeah, so if you put a visual in your mind, like let's say we're in a neighborhood and we live across the street from each other. And one day we're out in the yard and you're mowing your grass, I'm mowing mine. We stop and we start talking, and then I get angry with you. And you're like, man, what a jerk. What's going on here? And we both go back in our houses. We tell our beloved wives, hey, you say, York was just really angry with me. And I go in and I said, yeah, Perry was being a knucklehead, so I kind of barked him out. I know my wife well enough to say, she'd say, you need to go confess that to Perry. Yeah. You sinned against him. Alina would say to you, you probably want to need to go talk to Dave. So chances are we're probably coming out the front door and we're going to meet in the middle of the street. You're coming to tell me my sin against you, and I'm coming to tell you my sin against you.
Sure.
Right? When we're really leaning in to want relationships to be a biblical thing, you're going to find that's going to happen a lot. I can't tell you the amount of conversations I've had with brothers through the years. A lot of sin going on, right? And these brothers would say, Dave, I need to talk to you about something that happened in the meeting the other day. And I say, you know what it is? Is this what you're going to ask me about? And they go, yes. I go, you know what? I totally agree with you. I was an absolute idiot. Yeah. And here's what I did. Here's why I said that, or here's why, and we met in the middle. And there's what I love about that moment is neither one of us are fighting. Sure. Because the Spirit of God's at work. Sure. And it's like the Spirit of God's coming after me because his brothers come to me, right? So that's what I mean by it. Yeah. That would be the hope. Yeah. Now we can be real. Yep. That doesn't happen that way. Sure. 98% of the time.
Sure. Well, on that, so something has happened. We need the reconciliation. You were saying that we need to get face to face, right? Or even eyeball to eyeball.
Yeah.
So in our day and age, and especially with the pandemic continuing on, right?
Oh, man. It's a big
How
deal.
do you reconcile with someone who is long distance or shut in?
Yep.
What do you do there?
That's a great question. Now, the crazy thing is in the world we live in, we have technology enough that we could potentially do that. So, using FaceTime, Zoom, whatever it may be, that you can actually have.
That was our follow-up question. Yeah. What about Zoom and web chat?
Sure, I think you can do those things in that type of setting. We have the luxury of that, and you can actually see somebody. Now, the reason for face-to-face is several reasons. One, you're just not as courageous face-to-face as you would be behind a computer screen. Sure. Two, you can read voice inflection. You can read facial expressions. Not voice inflection, but facial expressions. Yep. You can read body language.
Right.
You read
true communication.
Yeah, you read intent a little bit more. Sure. That's why it's important. The other thing that face-to-face does is it shows you that I value you enough that I want to sit down with you face-to-face. Right? Now, so let's say that you have somebody living on the other side of the country. They're shut in. They have no technological skill whatsoever. Let's say it's your father that you guys have issues from the past. Sure. Then the attempt can be made certainly by making a phone call. And I think that's okay. If it's whatever effort it is. And
at least trying to establish some kind of communication.
That's right. And let's say a phone call can't happen. Then you can do an email or a letter. Right? So most certainly, if you read some of the great Christian men of the past, you're going to read them. They've written apology letters and letters of asking for forgiveness because of the distance and the time. So I think that those things would suffice, but they're not a substitute for real face-to-face. I think what we do in our culture is we substitute digital for face-to-face. And instead of, like I have this friend of mine that'll say, hey, I'll be joking. I'm going to joke in a text, but I'm never going to confront in a text. And I think that's good policy. So if I ever get a text from him that looks a little like weird, I automatically hear him say, I don't confront in a text. So I know that's the case. And so then I can call him and say, hey, I got your text. You're joking here, right? Oh yeah, totally joking, man. Okay, great. Yeah. So I would say if you can't get to them, you do everything you can to communicate to them. Right. Now let's take what about you? Let's say you had a parent that died, and you're not sure how to reconcile that, or a spouse. I mean, I know of several situations where spouses have died, and they were in a conflict, and the other spouse has this grief on them. And I think all you can do with that is you have to confess your sin to God, and trust that God knows and sees it. And that at that moment you've done all that you can.
Sure.
Personally, for me, that's one of the reasons why I want to stay current with my wife and my family and people around me.
Right.
I don't want to go to the grave with an unreconciled thing.
We are not promised for tomorrow.
We're not. We're not, man.
Right.
And my dad and I reconciled when I was 21, and knowing when he passed away in 2018, knowing that we were reconciled is one of the greatest gifts God gave me.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and I think all of us feel that grief, you know. And I've talked to enough people through it, and it's hard. Anytime the person's name comes up,
oh man,
they feel this, oh man, you know, or whatever.
Yep.
And so I just say, first, one way to, be reconciled with the person who is deceased is before they die. Do your best.
Yep.
Number two, once they die and the Lord's taken them, then you have to confess your sin and leave it with God.
Sure.
One person I knew, they said that they asked God to just deliver the message. I thought that was kind of sweet, and I was like, you know what? I'm okay with that.
No, I like that. Yeah, I like that. So and it's a great point, and it's something that we really need to take note on, is staying current. But then, of course, you have those people that need time to process. They need time to kind of figure the things out,
Totally get it.
So what does staying current to you look like?
That's really good. Jill, my wife is a processor, and
just not right now. Give me some time.
Well, she's a processor because, in all fairness, I'm a shotgun conversationalist. So it's like, boom, boom. I'll give her about 17 things to think about.
Sure.
And she'll just say, hey, can you hang on? I need to take notes on exactly what you're telling me because I need to figure this out. So what we have found to be the most successful thing to help us with is, if we both can't sit down and calmly talk about the situation, she will say, I need time to process this, but she will always give me a time. Can we talk about this tomorrow morning after breakfast? Can we talk about it after tomorrow when you come home from work, or we both get back together? Or if you're having lunch together the next day, can we talk about it at lunch? Sure. She's good about setting a time, because she knows, for me, who's not the processor, I need to know we're going to get to it. I also need to give her the space to process. So when she gives me a time, let's say she said, let's talk about this tomorrow morning after breakfast. I'll ask her, is that enough time for you? And she'll say, yes, I promise I'll have something together by then. And that promise tells me she's set a time. It's given me hope. We're going to be able to solve the issue. But we're also saying we're not going to ignore it.
Right.
So staying current, the issue behind staying current is, let's stop this thing where, like, you and I are interacting. There's a weird interaction between us. It feels weird. We both kind of walk away. You say something a little snarky to me. And instead of me going right back to you and saying, hey, Perry, can we talk about some... In my office, you just said something a little snarky, at least to me. Did you take it that way? Or that gives us a chance to immediately reconcile that.
Sure.
But instead, what do? Well, we ignore it.
And let it fester.
We just push it under the rug. And then
turns into something else.
3 weeks later, you say something else snarky. And I go, well, I remember when he did that before. This is number 2. And now we start making a list of wrong suffered. And before you know it, we're down a road that I think is really dangerous in our relationships. And that's why I say stay as current as possible. Ephesians 4, do not let the sun go down under your anger. Now, let me give a thought about that, though, because one of the things that Jill and I, especially in marriages, and I would even say in close friendships, be aware of the resolve and the ability of the other person and both of you to handle the situation. So an example would be, Jill and I have said, if it's past 9 o'clock at night, we can't, unless it's a major issue, we cannot solve a conflict very well. We're both tired, we're drained. And the older I get, the earlier that becomes. Right?
I'm fatigued, I'm exhausted. This is not the greatest time to have a conversation.
That's right. So I'd say know that about each other. Right. The other thing is, I'd say know your friend or your spouse well enough to know the season of life may not be a good time. So my wife knows me so well, and I'm very grateful for the gift that God gave me in her. And Jill will watch, and if I'm under a load at work, or if I'm pressured or really busy in a season, she knows this may not be the time to confront Dave on this situation, unless it's spreading, right? But she's done such a great job of waiting for the right moment when she knows, all right, Dave's ready. the Lord is, where you get this moment. And usually it's for me asking the question, hey, how did you think that went down? Or did that come off well? And she'll say, I didn't think that came off well. Can I tell you why? And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to lean in.
Nice.
And so I'd say those kind of things. But yeah, man, stay current. Processors need time to process. Those of us that don't need the kind of process, we need to give people the space. But the processors need to give those that don't process a hope.
Right.
We're going to get to this.
Right. You still have one goal in mind.
I'm not going to ignore this.
Yep. Very good. Well, let's move on to one of the other questions. I think when it comes to relationships and reconciliation, we all have kind of our go-to scriptures, if you will. And one section would be Romans 12:14-18.
It's a good one.
Which says, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. And here's the key. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all.
Yeah.
What is Paul pointing to with that statement?
Yeah, so you'll notice if you read that and you look at that text again, you'll notice the posture of the individual. There's a deference to the other person. There's a constant giving in,
Sure.
And when I think of Jesus going to the cross, right? Notice his posture. He just gave himself
Completely.
Scripture says that. And every charge was wrong. Every charge.
Right.
Yet, what did he say? Not my will, but your will. And Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. And there's this deference, this giving over for the sake of the other person.
Complete humility.
Yes, right. Well, then I think of how many times, like that text, also notice how many times in the text it talks about being wronged. When you're persecuted.
Sure.
When others mistreat you.
Sure.
Then at the end it says, if possible with you, be at peace or live peaceably with all men. And what he's basically saying is, we do everything we can to be right with the individual. Everything we can. And we also know this text means they may not want to be at peace with us. So I could give you a list of examples where you go after somebody and you've done all you can. And you have to leave it in the hands of God. I can think of situations where parents have children that when they graduated, left home, they abandoned their parents, never want to see them again. Sure. And the parents have reached out, they've phone called, they've met with them face to face, they've tried to reconcile. The children would say, yeah, we're all good. Sure. But yet never reciprocate.
Right.
And my opinion is parents like that have done all they can. Right? It may be a friend that suddenly betrays you, and you've gone to talk with them about that. They don't want to talk with you. Or you've hurt them and they don't want to sit down with you at the table. And you've reached out to say, I really want to talk with you about this face to face if we can. Right. And they never reciprocate. Right. You've done all you can. Yeah. Right? Now in our culture, we have so many avenues of communication, whether it's digital, Facebook, or social media, texting, phone, emails. We also have phone calls. We got a ton of ways. Sure. And I think as you go through every angle to try to get in touch with a person and they still stiff arm you, you have to leave that in the hands of God. But what I tell myself and what I tell others a lot is leave your marbles on the table that says to that person, anytime you're ready to come play, you know where I'm at. Right. And I gave the example a few weeks ago about the guy that we reconciled after 3 years on a phone call. And when I shot him the text and I said, hey, I'm thinking about you and praying for you. And he wrote back and said, can you talk? My response was, name the time and the place.
Game time, right.
We're on.
Yep.
Let's do this.
Yep.
I love you.
Yep.
My heart is toward you. Yep. I want to be right with you. Right. And I think that's what Paul's getting at it. Yeah. The other thing on this I want to be aware of is so often the focus is on our hurt. It's on what they've done to us. And I want you to notice in this text, in Romans 12, there's not any mention of that. The issue is not, well, look how much they've wronged me. Sure. The issue is, bless those who persecute you. Right. Live peaceably with all men. Sure. And his implication is, especially those who hurt you. Yeah. And so we want to say, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Sure. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. Sure. Rather than saying, okay, what is the attitude that God has toward me? Sure. And this Sunday we're going to talk about some of that.
Very good. On that note, let's just go to our last question. And it was like one of your very last points. You said Christians are on every side of reconciliation. Can you clear that up a little bit?
Yeah. So when you think about, like you meet in the middle. Mm-hmm. If there's a sin, I'm either confessing sin or I'm confronting sin. Or even, let's say that one of these brothers or sisters have come to me to say, this happened. I'm counseling them to go be at peace with one another, right? So at every side of this venture, I'm on all sides of it.
Sure.
And I'm playing a role in it. And I don't think we as Christians think that enough. We don't see, when we're sitting down having coffee with a friend and they start giving us a problem at work, yeah, we want to be a listening ear, absolutely. But we also want to be a reconciler.
Sure.
We want to find out with them and help our brother or sister know what are ways they could honor God in that situation. How could they serve Christ? How could they represent Jesus better? Maybe they're blowing up at work and they need to be told, you know what, that's not a great response. I would ask you to prayerfully consider if that represents Jesus very well. I remember throughout the pandemic in 2020, I remember just having multiple conversations with people, and I would ask this question: is what you're saying or doing, does that represent Jesus very well? And they'd say, oh my word, no.
Yeah.
And so we're on every side of this equation.
Sure.
And we're playing a part in it. We're not innocent bystanders, and that's what we think we are, and we're not. You're not sitting around watching this game play out.
Sure.
You're trying to help people get in peace with one another.
Right. And I guess if we take note of that, if we're able to see the different roles that we're playing, it's either it's at least going to become more routine, or I guess it's going to allow ourselves to either confront or even to receive a little bit easier if we have that mindset.
Absolutely.
Saying, this is something we just normally do as Christians, as brothers and sisters united under Christ.
Yes.
This is what we do.
Well, that's the thing. I'm glad you said that, because I think that one of the challenges that we have in our own American culture, I would say, some would say, what's pronounced in the Northwest, and I don't agree with that per se, because I lived in the South and I know the issue in the South would be different than it is in the North. But our basic challenge is, you mind your business, I'll mind mine.
Oh, sure.
Stay out of your world, I say. And I look at the Bible and I go, well, that's not actually true. And if you look at the great saints throughout history, Martin Luther had Philip Melanchthon who got in his grill.
Sure.
You had John Calvin and John Knox getting in each other's grill.
Right.
You could go through the list of the great people of the faith.
Right.
They didn't shy away from
No.
communicating this. Charles Spurgeon's wife would confront him on multiple levels to stop his whining and sniffling sometimes. And here she was laying in her bed, sick. So you think that was just normal, right? My thing is, what if we made this type of life so normal so that I'm saying encouraging things to you constantly about how God's at work in you, how much I appreciate what you're doing, the friendship I love with you, how much I love your family, I'm praying for you. And then when a moment comes up where you blow it or I blow it and we bring up sin, it's like, I know what this relationship's built on.
Right.
It's built on Christ and love. Right. And when this dude brings this to me, it's because he loves me.
Right.
And that just becomes so normal. Think how freeing that is. Right. I was telling my kids a story the other night when years ago we were hanging out with some friends at our house, and one of the brothers started telling a joke that was a little off color. And in the middle of the story, he starts, and I could tell where it's going, and I just tapped him on the shoulder and I said, "Hey man, it's inappropriate here." And he just stopped, looked around the room. Now they didn't have kids at the time. Yeah. And he looked, oh yeah, sorry man. Well, after the dinner was over, and we just kept going conversation. After dinner was over, he said, "Hey man, can I just say something? That was so cool what you did. Thanks for making that part of life. I don't have kids."
Yeah.
It never triggered to me. You got little ones sitting at the table. They're hearing me tell an off-color story.
No filter.
Right, exactly. And we had this talk about when that's appropriate, if it's not ever appropriate.
Right.
But it was so freeing. And he said that. He said, "I feel so free to be in a relationship with you because I know you'll call me out if need be."
Sure.
And I think that's what I want. I'm so jealous of that for our church, that we can live this life and be real. And suddenly somebody goes, "Hey, the other day we were out hanging out together and you made the story. I don't know if that was appropriate there. Do you?" And now you're in real, but you can keep living life. And you go, "Man, thanks for telling me that." But you don't feel criticized, judged, condemned. You just feel like brother to brother, sister to sister,
Sure.
walking life out.
Sure. You know, our world tells us that, you know, we're supposed to have it all together, if you will, to some extent. And then it's even, you know, saying that there's only certain things that you can confront me on, like what we were just discussing. But that's not just the world, per se. We bring all that garbage and mentality right into our Christian walk as well.
Yep.
We think we have to have it perfect, you know, it's just like, oh, come as you are, and now I'm here, I'm supposed to have everything together, and, you know, we've got the perfect family, we've got the perfect house, we've got yada, yada, yada. And yet again, no, we are all a mess, and we're trying to figure this thing out solely by the Word of God.
Yeah.
You know, but what would you say to those Christians that they're coming into the church for the first time, and maybe they just feel like, you know, yes, I've confessed to Christ, now I've got all this stuff to work out.
Sure.
What do I do now?
Well, I mean, that's a multifaceted question, but I'd say that the first thing is, man, so grateful that they're here and they're recognizing that. But I'd also say this, that's what the community of believers are for. You know, you go back to your original thing that you just kind of started that with about this attitude of we have to have it all together.
Sure.
I think personally it's a failure of the church.
Okay.
I think we preach the gospel that basically says we are going to have it all together and we've got it all together, so we're going to tell you how to get your stuff together. When in reality, when I look at the beauty of the scripture, Jesus came because we don't have it all together.
Sure, right.
And so if we could posture ourselves rightly before the cross, we begin to realize, you know what, I don't have this thing all together, and neither does he, and neither does he, and neither does he.
Right.
And so then when somebody brand new comes in, and they're looking at their list of sins that they got to address or their list of whatevers, they can sit down with brothers and sisters that go, hey, I got my own list too, man. Where do you want to start?
Right.
And I'd love to help you and be alongside you and care for you and love you. And I think that the church has got to do a better job. That's why I think that Matthew 7 is so important.
Sure.
Taking that old growth timber out of our own eyes first and realizing we got our own issues.
Right.
What the church has done in the last several years, well, last 20, 30 years in America has been, you got the problem, you need to figure out it's a world's issue.
Yep.
Instead of us looking internally first and going, we got a big old tree sticking out of our eyeballs, and we need to take a long look at who we are.
Right. And I think there's one thing that at least we try to do well is you don't have to have all the right facades and aesthetically you look a certain way, or you have to be able to say all the right things. No, we're going through this thing called life together, and we're trying to figure it out together, you know? And I think that's really important.
Well, and I think that too, you know, we have a lot of people in our church that have been hurt, and they've seen sin.
Sure.
And some of them have done the hurting. And we have a lot of people that screwed it up at times, and we all have an understanding of who we are.
Right.
But let me add one other piece of this. I do think that is the byproduct, and it's a fruit of keeping the gospel in front. That's why I think being a gospel-centered, Christ-centered preaching, teaching is so important. If we put behavior in the center, at some point we're going to see that we're pretty good or not very good. If we put Christ in the center, then we're all leaning into the same thing. We all see ourselves equal at the foot of the cross. We all recognize that Jesus came for us. We all see that our sin is what Christ died for, and we all see it's God's love that's been richly displayed to us in Christ. And suddenly your whole posture of your room changes.
Oh, it's something we can count on.
It's something you count on?
If you're to put behavior in the middle,
forget it.
It's a roller coaster ride, ups, down, sideways.
But it also postures your humility and pride appropriately.
Sure.
You know, it allows us to not, highlight the big gifted ones. And it allows us as well to all recognize our need. And so then I think by and large it creates a very transparent, open, real people that just says, yeah, man, let's talk. I mean, so you and your spouse are having a battle. Let's talk about that. My wife and I had the same thing, or you're having a battle with addictions. I know addictions. They may not be the same as yours, but I know addictions, and I've battled things as well. And you're suddenly there to be able to be like I said earlier, a fellow struggler. That's linking arms. And we're all trying to get to the end together.
That's fascinating about the body of Christ is you think about just how vast, of people that we have as a community. You've got you can look at it in just the professions and everything. You've got your tradesmen, you've got your quintessential business guys and that kind of thing. But then you also look at just what people struggle with, you know. So chances are, in the body of believers, that very thing that you're struggling with, somebody's, you know, at least tried to combat it, you know, themselves. And just what a gift that God has given us through one another for us to be able to point each other to Christ, because we get it, you know. Very good. Well, on that note, let's where are we headed this Sunday? What do we have to look forward to?
Well, I mean, this Sunday we're going to talk about how to protect. How do you protect the church in this? And we're going to talk about dealing with divisive people, specifically dealing with gossip and slander. And then we're going to end the sermon on real practical ways to protect these relationships. The ways we think, the way we speak to or about one another. To really try to give some framework to, okay, so let's keep ourselves from out of having to maintain them, you know, where they've blown up. Let's protect them. And how do we do that? And we all know gossip and slander ruins the church. By the grace of God, we have not had a gossipy issue in the church, and I'm very grateful for that. I think some of that's because we do a good job of some of the things we're going to talk about this week. You know, so that's where we're going.
Well, I'm sure as everyone out there is watching, we are so grateful for not only just the sermon series, but even just the opportunity that we have to discuss some of these questions and take them on. And then, as always, CLF, if you guys have questions, keep on sending them in. We'd love to hear from you guys. And on that note, we will see you Sunday.
All right, see you Sunday.